Good day, everyone. Excellency ministers, and then all the esteemed the colleagues, and then the ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mohsin Hafeez. I'm the country representative for Pakistan and regional representative of Central Asia for International Water Management Institute. I will be the moderator for today's high-level session for the next 1 hour. On behalf of the organizing partners, United Nations Office for the Disaster Risk Reduction and International Water Management Institute, I am pleased to welcome you for this high-level session on reflections from the ground, opportunities for upscaling preparedness to future climate shocks and extreme events. In this particular session, we will aim to share recent experiences of Pakistan flood and heat wave, which have brought great devastation, flood in terms of food, land, and water system, and that has also impacted on human health and many of the livelihood of the people. When we are talking about Pakistan is one of the most climate vulnerable country, and it listed around 8 climate vulnerable countries, and so due to recent floods, that has been many lives have been lost, around 1700, and it has a huge impact on implications for water system, and resulting impacts on health is enormous. So in this session, we'll highlighting the challenge of managing the Indus River within the context of changing climate, and also hearing from the Excellency Minister on the Pakistan government of Pakistan priority to restore ecosystem and livelihood in the Indus River. In this session, we will be also learning from Excellency Professor Hani Sewilam about what's happening in Egypt, how Egypt is dealing really about the climate shocks, especially drought, and what are the practical steps for strengthening the collaboration, and how we could learn from part of Pakistan and part of the Egypt, and that could be applied in part of Pakistan, and leading towards the climate resilient infrastructure. And the third is basically we'll be also Julien Harneis is here. We'll be also looking around that one based on a scientific evidence base, how we could learn around the different climate shocks and unpack the extreme events, flood, droughts, heat waves, and all sort of things. How we could better prepare ourselves for the future to deal with those kind of climate shocks. With this one, so I just let me introduce my extreme speakers for today's session. Excellency Madam Rehman, who is the Minister of Climate Change, representing Government of Pakistan. Excellency Professor Hani Sewilam, Egyptian Minister of Water Sources and Irrigation, and Mr. Julien Harneis, who is UN Resident Coordinator for Pakistan. Let's say we will start with the first video about the disasters in part of Pakistan that's produced by IMI. Video, please. Yeah. Yeah. No, with that. That will come second.
In the context of Pakistan, climate change is a water change, but we also need to acknowledge that it is far more complex than floods and drought. EB will continue to provide support to the Pakistan authorities in providing scientific solutions and evidence-based support. For the whole world, this disaster is a major wake-up call on the need of climate defenses.
Thank you. I will be requesting Excellency Ministers to please come on stage. That will be shown later on. So now the plan for today is I will be asking two round of questions to each of the esteemed panelists and the speaker. So the first round of questions is I will be starting with Madam Sherry Rahman. And then Madam Sherry, the first question is to you that in the most recent 2022 floods, the poorest population in Pakistan have suffered a lot, and then especially the Balochistan and Sindh provinces where there was more than 400% precipitation in 2022 if you are looking around the long-term 30 years average as compared to long-term 30 years. And rural populations have not only lost the homes, but it's also their livelihood has been impacted. In March, April, May, we were talking about that the heat waves. Then June, July, August, we were talking about the floods. And that has impacted and livelihood of around more than 30 people have been affected by the flood, and 1,700 people have died. We know that one that many areas of Sindh province, which is a downstream of part of Sindh, Pakistan, that is still there is standing water, and then the farmers are not able to grow crops during the ongoing Rabi season. Considering your ground knowledge of the Sindh province, I am interested to know the extent of the damage hit by the flood and the government priority to minimize the future climate shocks impacting the Sindh province.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Institute of Water Management, International Institute of Water Management, uh, Your Excellency Professor Hani and Resident Coordinator, United Nations for Pakistan, Julien Harneis. Thank you for joining us in thinking about water management and particularly asking about how we are surviving the flood and what we intend to do about it. I think that's exactly your question, right? So, the great flood has exceeded our knowledge and planning of all previous climate catastrophes, including the 2010 super flood. We've had a huge flood we thought broke all records in 2010 when the entire international community was seen in Pakistan assisting and coordinating and even doing the heavy lift on relief, rescue, then later rehabilitation and recovery operations. Right now, what we saw unfold on our part of the earth was something I don't think anybody in living memory has seen in the world. It was a triple flood, if you like, but mostly from the sky. We have never seen a monsoon turn into the kind of deluge it did. And it was relentless. It was actually 7 times more than the average in the province of Sindh, which you asked about, which remains transformed, I think, forever. Its topography has changed. It will not go back to being what it was, which is half the breadbasket of the country. And then torrential hill torrents from the north, because we have the largest glaciers in the world, largest number of glaciers outside the polar region. In the north, they burst the glacial lakes there burst their banks, or rather burst their ice. And then we had hill torrents and flash floods all combined to come down with to the south with along with these non-stop rains, which did not allow our helicopters to take off to rescue people, which is what happens in traditional flooding catastrophes. To rescue people, you need helicopters. So birds could not fly in this rain, whether mechanical or living. And it told us that we are in a new era of climate stress and extreme weather events where our technology has not caught up with with the ways we need to save lives, and the way accelerated climate change is bringing what the UN Secretary General called the worst carnage he has seen, climate carnage, in his life. And believe me, he and UN OCHA have seen quite a lot. So 33 million affected. The number is almost the same as 3 European small-sized or medium-sized countries. And we have ourselves a situation where people are still in Sindh, which was 80% the most affected, living in shelters that are not their homes. They will not see their livelihoods come back to them for a long time, if at all. And they're quite clear that these 33 million, out of these 33 million affected, at least half are still in need. And what that means is that they're living away from homes. Winter is coming, and they will not be able to farm their land. It's transformed, as I said. A lot of it is still underwater, unable to drain because it's under sea level, and has not found, because this is not the traditional flooding of the Indus River, which comes in from the north. So it has not found the normal drainage channels that a river might be taking, or we might be cutting through. But this time, if we cut through one side, the other side gets damaged. So the loss and the damage is huge. It's worth $30 billion just for this climate event. And $30 billion is a great deal of vulnerability to fix for one country alone, in terms of numbers, in terms of lives, and very importantly, livelihoods, because that is the unpredictability and precariousness that we see in communities that have just been displaced for a very long time. And we also think that, particularly in Sindh, the resilient rebuilding, the project of then looking at our old storm drains that don't work, looking at big drainage projects from like the LBOD, left bank outfall drain, and the right bank, all of these are now in up for consortium funding that we really cannot finance at this point. There's that. And then there's asking people, look, you can't live near the old floodplain anymore. You can't live near this small rainwater reservoir. There were some dams that were built just for storing water, not like the big old dams that like Tarbela, Mangla, Sakhar Barrage, not like those. But these two became risks. The small dams, or rather reservoirs, that we had started building thinking, yes, water security is our biggest problem. There will be a water famine by 2025. So let's start at least doing this. And these small dams or small reservoirs, they were not terribly small, but they became risks for the communities living around them. They flooded, they overflowed, and they created new challenges and risks and literally shocks for the community, which had to run, and many lives were lost. As you heard, over 1,700 lives were lost. And while it was raining, nobody could rescue the people, even when we saw them on video. So it's been a very traumatic time. The helicopters just could not take off, they would just come right down again. And obviously, our navy has been operating inland for after with such scale that you wonder what the Pakistan Navy is doing inland of the country. It operates small boats otherwise, but this time they've had a lot to do. Um, just rescuing people. And I'd request permission to play a 3-minute video to show you the devastations that flooding could cause, simply because there are no words to describe what happens when this kind of climate fury is unleashed for unprepared communities, which is why we need to prepare. And we can talk about that after you get the video rolling. But I appreciate the condolences. Here it is. No, this is the Living Indus project, which is the adaptation project we were talking about. Are you playing this one? No, I wanted to play the flood. They wanted to ask about the flood. I would love to play that one too. They're all 2 minutes each. But it's very important to us that you see what we're going through. Could we have some volume? It's a very noisy COP environment. We need some volume, ma'am. Without volume, it's coming? Okay, not after the video, please. Full volume, please. Full.
I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage of this scale. I have simply no words to describe what I've seen today.
Thank you, Madam Sharing, for sharing that I mean, that the freely that the disaster impacts, and then the video is really heartbreaking, and then that's really saddened that how many human loss we have lost. Now, I would like to welcome to Honorable Minister of Environment from Western Australia, sir. Welcome. Okay, so moving on, this segment is I will be now moving to the next is the Julien Harneis. Julien, we have witnessed that the climate shock in part of Pakistan, heat waves or the flood waves. We know that one from the IPC climate change report. Climate change is one of the major factors contributing towards that this disaster. What are the other contributing factors in the context of Pakistan, and then as well as what should we do differently to avoid these future climate shocks or minimize their impact in part Pakistan?
Shukran jazilan. So good afternoon, assalamu alaikum, and great to be here. So the well, okay, you've got climate change, but there's two other factors, macro, which are leading to 33 million people affected, nearly 8 million people displaced. One, population growth. Population growth in Pakistan since independence until now has gone up by almost 8 times. And so we're now in a country with 220 million people, 90% of whom are entirely dependent upon the Indus Basin. And so where do you put those people? How do you feed them? Naturally, with so many people, it means a lot of people end up forced to live on marginal lands. It's not they know that these areas will flood. It's not a surprise to them, but they don't have choices. So population growth puts huge pressure on society and on government to deal with the issues. And so when you have climate change, when you have heavy rains, flooding, hits the population growth, then you've got a tragedy. And that's what we saw this year. The second thing is we have the science, but we're not acting on it, right? Pakistan has some excellent laws. It's got some very good water policies in many different provinces. But we've got institutes like IWMI that are putting out excellent science. We've got research, right? But we're not bearing that in mind in our lives at all levels, government, society, individuals, in my own home, right? So where do we need to go into the future? We need to act on the science, right? We know what will happen if we do not change course, and we know what can be done to change course. Now, that's a message for Pakistan, but it's also a global message, right? Population growth on this planet combined with not acting on the science is taking us to a very dark place, and we could turn that around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for highlighting that the need of evidence-based solution. In the context of Pakistan, we have so many policies: environment policy, water policy, climate change policy, food security policy. But policies are not, first thing is implemented. Second thing is policies are working in isolation. How we could make sure that these policies are really implemented at all level, at the federal level, at the provincial level, at the local level. Now, just moving to that, the Egyptian experience here, Excellency Professor Hani Sewilam, Egyptian, when we're talking about the climate, it's like a desert-like climate, but rainfall is between 20 millimeter and 200 millimeter in the context of Egypt. And I am aware of that one. The Egyptian government is working on improving the early warning system to deal with the extreme weather events and prolonged drought, especially for agriculture production. Could you please share your experience in dealing with the extreme climate events and droughts that are very common threats to part of Pakistan? And secondly, is what are the practical steps for strengthening the collaboration, especially from learning the lesson from Egypt, and how those lessons could be transformed or applied in the context of Pakistan for developing a climate resilient infrastructure?
Okay. Good afternoon. Yes, I think we have a lot of similarities between Pakistan and Egypt, especially when it comes to drought. Flood, we have two types of flood: flood in the Upper Nile and drought in the Upper Nile. That's Fortunately, that's not really impacting us directly because the water is coming from the Upper Nile, from the Nile Basin countries, and then stored in High Aswan Dam or the upstream of High Aswan Dam. So the water is more or less is under control by the big High Aswan Dam. But this does not mean that we are not suffering from the hydrological extremes, because in the case of drought or prolonged drought in the upstream, that's definitely is impacting the reservoir, and in turn, it impacts the Egyptian society. On the other hand, there are hydrological extremes happening within the Egyptian borders as as flash floods, in the form flash floods. Maybe later on I can show you also one video for to get the feeling how this flood looks like. Um, but this is, of course, having the High Aswan Dam is enabling us to control the water all over the country. Um, Coming to the water and the water productivity is other part of the question, that we do have a very closed loop system that I can just very simply describe. We have the water share from the River Nile, which is 55.5 billion cubic meter, and we're speaking about 104 million inhabitants. So the water share per capita is slightly above the 500 cubic meter per capita per year, which means you are far below the water poverty line. If the water poverty line, for the who don't know, it's 1,000 cubic meter per capita per year, and you have almost 500, which means you are missing 50% of the minimum water required for the country. How we deal with this? First, as you said, the water productivity of unit water, and this is actually is happening throughout the entire system, because the Egyptian system has the River Nile, and then you distribute the water to the farmers with different levels of canals till you reach the small tributary reaching the farm level, Merwa or Meska or whatever you call it, and then the farmer takes the water for irrigation, either in the new land with modern irrigation system, and this is one key word for increasing the productivity of each unit water, is to have modern irrigation system. And then whatever is not used by the plants goes to the underground drainage system, and the drainage system is collecting the water from under the ground to the drainage open channels, and then collect them to the water treatment plant, and then dispose them back in the system again. So the water is in a closed circle. Even the groundwater is used in other areas. So even using the Nile water for recharging the aquifer, because other farmers are dependent on groundwater. So this system ensures that you use each drop of water in a more efficient way. Even the drainage is used again, and it could be 2-3 times depending on the cycle, where and at which location. So this what makes the system very efficient in total. And then you ask yourself, how can you cover 50% of our needs in water? I can't say with this amount of water we are able to cover and reach the poverty line. Definitely not, because we are importing almost or more than 20 billion cubic meter in the form of virtual water. And the virtual water, we say this is the crops we have to import. We are the biggest importer of wheat on earth. That's why we are one of the countries that's impacted enormously by the war between Ukraine and Russia. That's impacting us. Even the war, we have nothing to do with the war. We have little to do with the climate change, but we are impacted from both of them. We are impacted from the climate change, and we are impacted from the Ukrainian and Russian war because of our food. The bread is coming from these countries, and we pay for it, of course. But now you have the trouble with the importing the wheat, because as I said, 20 billion cubic meter in the form of food we have to import. So this is the way how the Egyptian system is functioning. When it comes, add to that the climate change. The climate change also plays an important role from different directions. So we pay the invoice of the climate change more than one time. First, any hydrological extremes happening in the Nile Basin countries is impacting the water coming to Egypt, either flood or drought. Any sea level rise is happening in the north, in the Mediterranean Sea, is impacting the north coast, and it's impacting also our groundwater by the saltwater intrusion. So, and within the Egyptian borders, the climate change is impacting the farmers, impacting the crop water requirement is increasing, the industrial water is increasing, the household water is increasing. So all of these are complicating the system. But again, the efficiency of the system is we are trying with this to have more resilient system to the climate change. But I stop here so to give our colleague also the chance to comment on these challenges, because also they are having some challenges with the water.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hani Sewilam. Just want to mention few things, few facts. In Egypt, I'm just coming. Yeah, I'm just coming. In Egypt, definitely that the water productivity, you're exporting a lot for the importing a lot wheat and everything, but also the water productivity for wheat crop is 4 times higher than part of Pakistan. Now I will moving to the Honorable Minister from Australia, Western Environment. Please, sir, could you please share your insight on that one, especially in Australia where there's all those policies are really implemented there. What are your insights from that one? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's a great honour to be here from Western Australia. I represent a provincial state government in Australia, which is Western Australia, which is a very large landmass and is very arid and shares commonalities with Egypt in terms of the climate challenges we face. I think it's incredibly interesting, one of the comments about Pakistan, Minister, and I think in your video display, the comment was made that Pakistan is responsible for 1% of global emissions, about less than that? Less than that, okay. Well, Australia totally, on a national basis, is responsible for a small amount as well. It's about 1.5% of global emissions, so more than Pakistan. But the very key point I make about that is that the Australian population is about 27 million. So you have 27 million people creating more emissions than the population of Pakistan. So we have an obligation to be a global citizen in this area. We are a major emitter. And in Western Australia, we have had much experience of dealing with climate extremes. You've talked about the flooding issues in Pakistan. We have drought issues with climate change. Our rainfall in our southwest of our state, where our major capital city is located, has declined from the 1970s dramatically, and that has put pressure on our resiliency in terms of water. So in the 1970s, 70% of drinking water came from rain. Now it's only about 5% because rainfall has been declining over that time. We were the first Australian jurisdiction to build a desalination plant. We're about to build our third, and most of our drinking water comes from desal. So there are challenges there. But what I believe the opportunities are, and I think events like COP27 are very useful because it connects people who are dealing with similar challenges. And I was speaking to a group of Egyptian businessmen yesterday in Cairo who are working with Western Australian companies to transfer technology that applies that they can use. So Western Australia is a very isolated community. We have been facing these challenges for many, many, many decades. We already have an extreme climate scenario. The problem is it is just getting worse with climate change. And so the opportunities are there to share technology. When you are isolated, when you are remote, you become innovative. So there's the opportunity for transfer of technology in terms of water treatment, and I think there's application with Egypt, and there's already involvement on a business-to-business level. We also We also have much experience in terms of trying to revegetate our very arid community. And there's an interesting point the Honourable Minister made about wheat. So you are the biggest importer of wheat in the world. I think we are one of the biggest exporters, and that's not the nation, that is the state of Western Australia. We have an enormous wheat belt, and it has been challenged by that declining rainfall I spoke about. The interesting point, though, is that we have become very efficient. Our farmers have become very efficient in producing varieties of wheat that are resilient. So last year, we had a record harvest of 20 million tonnes of wheat, even in spite of climate change, in spite of declining rainfall. This year, there is another record harvest of 20 million tonnes. So again, there are enormous challenges, but with the sharing of technology and ideas, there are opportunities. And I think that's why I'm here, because I believe that we can help with our experience, and it's a two-way learning experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Sir. Yes, that you're absolutely correct. There is a two-way of learning, but I will say there is three-way of learning. Having worked in Australia more than 15 years, so I'm aware of some of the challenge and how you overcome of some of the scientific challenge to boost the productivity of irrigated agriculture and rain-fed agriculture. And there is a learning from Australia to Egypt as well as to Pakistan, and two-way around. Now let's move on the second level of the question. But before we going on that one, I will be requesting for a presentation, for a video, please, on the Living Industry Initiative. Please. Yes. Thank you. So now, Madam, my question is: we have shown, we have seen that the video on the Living Industry Initiative, and I'm aware of the ministry's strategy that the climate adaptation is a defense strategy to deal with the future climate shock in the industry. Could you please provide a brief overview of the Living Industry Initiative and top 3 or 4 interventions, which will be out of the 25 interventions? And also looking around, considering the time, I will be saying if you could, in 2 to 3 minutes, providing an overview about living in this river.
I'll pass. No, I'm just being difficult here because we're facing a very existential challenge at home, and the living in this is a great opportunity. It is an opportunity in the middle of egregious challenge. What it's doing is serving as an axis of adaptation, a river intervention recharge project, and this river cuts through the entire length of Pakistan, and as the UN representative said, it 90% of Pakistan in one way or the other feeds lives and drinks of this river. So we have also the largest man-made irrigation system in the world, but it is under stress, like the river, from the exigencies and impacts of climate change, as well as our own anthropogenic activities such as pollution, degradation of the banks around it, building in the wrong places and settling in the wrong places. And of course, the high populations do act as a multipliers to the crisis that is afflicting this living jugular vein, if you like, of the country. Now, we have created this project with the help of the United Nations in Pakistan across all the 4 provinces. It has the leadership and the buy-in of the entire federation, because water is fundamental to our future. It is our frontline need and climate challenge. Because before the flood came, I want to respond to what the 2 ministers said about droughts. Half the part, the south that is flooded right now of Sindh, was the river was bone dry. So we were already facing desertification and extreme salinity for years. And this great raging river, which 10, 15 years ago used to nourish an entire ecosystem down the river, and not to mention being the breadbasket of the country, it had become a very tragic trickle, a face of itself. So we were wondering what it is we can do, and then came the flood. So climate change is classic example: extreme flooding, extreme desertification, and droughts. One of the other or both together. And so if you're getting both, the thing you do have to do is manage your river, which becomes the great instrument of adaptation for communities, for the country, for floodwater management, for biodiversity management, for the wetlands regeneration, also for the marine species, the thousands that live off it, including the blind dolphin, which is unique to Pakistan and the Indus River. And of course, creating the nature-based solutions like the mangroves as buffers. We have one of the largest and most successful in the world regeneration program of mangoes. And I have a friend sitting here in the audience, Tariq Alexander, who works daily with the mangroves and makes is an aesthetic recorder of the growth and the nurturing he provides. So he'll be presenting at our pavilion tomorrow. I welcome you all to it. But here we have a multiple set of menus for intervention in regenerating this great river, so it's able to feed and nurture a huge population, and mostly not just manufacturing, but vulnerable communities, livestock based communities, farming communities, all live along the length of this river, whether it's in the north, where we have a very successful glacial lake outburst flood management program with one of the UN agencies. And those are community-based interventions where a high alert is posted through, a great deal of training. So it's a successful intervention, but in the south, we were unable to save the lives we wanted to, were desperate to, because we had no plan for this kind of from the sky flooding. So now the river is under extreme stress. It is posing a risk to Pakistan, as well as it's an existential nurturing lifeline. We have to manage it both infrastructurally as well as at its biodiversity and its ecology and the quality of its water. And before this flooding had happened, I remember, don't know if you remember, Julien, I made a video saying the water crisis is Pakistan's frontline climate emergency, asking people to conserve water because, look, governing water is one thing, but also using water is one thing. These are behavior changes societies need to make, and we are one of the largest per capita users of water. We overuse our water in many communities and across the country. But having said that, now we have water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And there is just isn't enough clean water around, and this water is posing a hazard, the one that's standing there. It's not probably going away anytime soon, but the recharge of this river will help, and the flood management interventions are 15 in the 25 living menu that we've created. 15 of those interventions manage floods through groundwater recharge, through aquifer replenishment, through creating drainage and an architecture of natural culverts and drainages along that river. It could also feed the river to come alive again, to breathe again, and become the vital intersect at the conjoin of human security and climate change that we need to revive again. So this is a great project. I'm sorry to be pitching it here, but I need to be pitching this everywhere because it is what will make Pakistan live again. This is the one project that can do that. But before we do that, we need to ensure that that river does not die. And right now, between our human activity as well as climate change impacts, that's what's happening. Let's hope that we can use this COP as an opportunity to leverage some buy-in in that. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Sherry, for really giving the insight of the Living Industry River Initiative. I am a strong believer if that will be really implemented on the ground, that will be transformational journey for Pakistan in terms of better water management to deal with those kind of disasters. Now I'll be moving on, looking also at the time where we need to close this session. But I will be going to Honorable Honorable Mr. Hani sir. Just based on the learning from part of Pakistan, Living Indus River Initiative, and we talked also about the other activities, what's happening in dealing with the drought. One of the biggest achievement in Egypt, which Egypt has done, is developing the drainage system, which is a functional, and the drainage system is functional, and that's multiplying the water reuse couple of time, and that's boosting the water productivity. In Pakistan, we used to have a drainage system, but that's not functional anymore, and that's creating all kind of problem which we are dealing with. Any insight, any learnings, how the Egypt has kept that one, that the drainage system, and what could we do in terms of in Pakistan, where drainage is one of the major problem because the water is not being treated and not water used. Any learning from the reflection from Egypt that could be helpful for part of Pakistan?
Yeah, in our ministry, we do have an authority for drainage system, and here we are not speaking about sewage drainage. We are speaking specifically about agriculture drainage system, and that's the subsurface system that's installed under the lands of the farmers, and then it collects the water to the open channels, and then takes it from the open channels to the treatment, and then it is dumped back again in the canals as I described before. And this system is working for many years in a very efficient way, because the most advantage here that you provide an optimum condition to the crops. Whatever excess water will receive go to the root zone, it will infiltrate and go to the drainage system and then to be circulated, and also reduce the salinity in the ground. We have the Nile Delta, it's quite saline soil. And if you don't add enough water, because many people are pushing to go for modern irrigation or drip irrigation, I would say you have to be very careful when you move to a modern irrigation when it comes to salinity. Yes, in a modern irrigation systems, you still can go to a crop water requirement, leaching requirements, irrigation requirements. All of these you can calculate it, but you need a very well-educated farmer to do that. So if you have the farmer, you have that. If you have the farmer who is not well trained to deal with modern irrigation systems, then you have to be careful when you move to modern irrigation, because as I said, when you give a little water, then the salt might be accumulating in the root zone, and you reduce the productivity of the soil. That's why having a drainage system is a very good solution, or subsurface drainage system is a very good solution, especially in areas that's saline like the Nile Delta. So this is to that point. But also I would like to mention here, because we are in the COP, and I think I need to stress in this COP that this is a COP of implementation. And we are looking for projects to be implemented in our countries. We are looking for projects to be implemented in the Middle East and Africa. We heard a lot. We had enough blah, blah, blah. And I think now it is a time really to react. It is a time to act on the ground. It is a time to do something. I have a problem with any international global climate change agreement that does not include the word water. I mean, Paris Agreement does not include water, and that's a problem. That's really a problem for us. This has to be changing. Water should be at the heart of climate change. There is no adaptation without considering water. That's a key word, and this is for us the water COP. So we need really to focus on water. We need implementation and we need action. We all understand that we have economic crisis and we have war, but as we discussed, when war is there, money comes out. But when the climate change is there and the poor people are suffering, money does not come out. Now it is a time in this COP that the money should come out for implementation for poor countries, not specifically Egypt, not only Egypt, but also all the African countries are having similar problems: drought, hunger, lack of food, water security, energy security, and you cannot even separate them. When we're talking about renewable energies, the Western countries, the industrial countries knew how to solve the energy problem. PV system prices have been reduced over 10 years, 90%. 90% the cost reduction of the PV systems in 10 years. Water desalination, water treatment has to be also following the same path. The cost of desalination and the cost of water treatment and the cost of drainage systems, the cost of modern irrigation has to be reduced by at least 90% in the coming 10 years, because we know how to do it. But you do it when you have the interest. If you don't have the interest, you just turn to the other side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, really. Thank you very much for really sharing about the insight, this need for the action, implementation on the ground, and this the climate crisis is a water crisis, and that's where we need to work around how we could develop a solution. Looking at the time, as well as when I will be now requesting for the next one is basically requesting Dr. Mark Smith, Director General of International Water Management Institute, for the closing remarks. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Mohsin. First, thank you, Excellencies, for a really compelling panel discussion. And particularly, as you started off, Minister Rehman, painting a very vivid picture of the catastrophe that your country has suffered. And I was very moved by that, in part because here we are at COP, and this place and this process, this building we're sitting in, it feels so dislocated from the tragic realities that are out there and that we're here to deal with. And so we saw that on the screen. We had a glimmer of it on the screen, and I found that extremely sobering. You described that part of the impacts of the catastrophe is that Pakistan has been forced to shift into a new era. And technology has not caught up, leaving the question of how. How do you navigate that? How do we do this? Now, you talked about resilient rebuilding. How? How do we do that? In the case of Egypt, we heard about the focus on drought and the gap, the 50% gap you talked about, the missing 50%, the missing 50% of water that are needed by the people, and the way that Egypt addresses that through water productivity, through, I would say, a culture around water productivity. So getting more from the water that you have, and including recycling and using that water for productive purposes several times over. So maximizing the efficiency per drop. But also recognizing that implicit in that are connections through to the world system, to the world economy, because you have to make up part of that gap in water through virtual water and food imports, and that creates a different set of vulnerabilities. So what do we do? What do we do? What are the lessons? How do we act on the science? How do we change course in the way that Pakistan has realized that it's on the threshold of? How do we change course? And part of that, as you outlined, is sharing experiences and technologies and successful experiences. For example, from the pressures that the water system in Western Australia has been put through in the last couple of decades. And around that, using, I think, as part of that cultural history that Egypt has around water, using these pressures to drive innovation. And a great example of the need for innovation, the drivers for innovation, is this Living Indus initiative. So reimagining the Indus as a climate resilient system. Can we really do that? It's a big challenge. So I'm left with the question of how. How do we translate such an imperative for the country of Pakistan, and it plays out in other places, of course. How do we translate that into, as you summarized, Minister? How do we translate that into ensuring that we focus on implementation and that we're mobilized for implementation? Part of that may be helped, may be catalyzed by making this, as you said, the COP of implementation, and putting water in the agreement, putting these kinds of challenges up front in the agreement. So IWMI, I'll speak for a very brief moment. For IWMI, we're committed as an institution to supporting the government of Pakistan, the government of Egypt, two locations where we have offices, in helping to meet these challenges. And I'm sure the water community that's assembled here is equally committed. But we have to work out, as we move into this mode of action, we're going to have to learn as we go, and we're going to have to work out and respond to that question of how as we go forward. And we'll need to do that in a very collaborative, cooperative, joint action sort of way. So I look forward to bringing us together and supporting that process as we go forward. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I would like to say thank you all the honorable ministers, and then Julien and the ministers, and then Mark for really, and then everyone for really participating. And then as Professor Hani Sewilam, the honorable minister, mentioned that this is a water COP, and let's not talk only about the discussion, but how we could implement on the ground and how we could transform the water system. Thank you, everyone.